recorded. So if you are not able to stay for the entire time, or if you want to go back and revisit, we will post the replay on our YouTube channel. Also, feel free to take advantage of the chat. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand so that we can see that you are that you want to ask a question, so that we can address it for you. And I will hand things over to Tezarah.
Hello, everyone. I can't see. Hold on. Trying to see if I can see everybody who's here.
We did have a few people step out. I'm hoping that they come back in.
Yes. You think I should wait a little, or you think I should get started?
I will get started just because we are running a little behind, but we always have the replay, so that's always a plus.
All right. So for those of you who don't know me, and like Jasmine said, my name is Tezarah Wilkins. I've been an artist for a very long time, I would say all my life, but I've been a full-time artist only for maybe the last 5 or 6 years now. And a lot of that has been me applying to grants. I am a multimedia artist, so I'm familiar with applying to grants for things in the arts, media arts. I'm a photographer by trade, film projects, and other things like that. So I'll be sharing a lot of my experience with you today about completing grants as an artist, and also my experience just working on grant panels and choosing grantees for grants. So I've worked with a couple of different organizations that are grant making organizations, and I've been, in those seats, reading applications, looking at budgets, and trying to decide, which projects or which artists we felt would be best for the funds. So I'll share some of my experience with that. I want this to be very open dialogue. So if you have any questions about anything, you can stop me at any time, and we can go over that stuff. All right, so our agenda for today, I do want to do some quick intros, if that's possible, just to get an idea of the people who are in the room and what types of, experience you have. And then I'll move through our slideshow just based off some of these questions that people have asked before. Things like, should I hire a grant writer? What exactly is a grant? Where do these grants come from? How do I get them? And what should I do to prepare for them? And once I have them, what should I do next? And then I can also give some tips for other things that you can do if you can't find grants. So other ways that you can kind of get around that. All right, so we can do some welcome and introductions. If you could, I have here, you can say your name and your gender pronouns. If you have any affiliations, you can state those if you'd like, and your artistic discipline. And if you could give me a specific thing that you're interested or expecting to learn in this workshop, that would be great. I just want to make sure that I'm providing information that you actually want. So I guess we can start with Carolee. Oh, I can't hear you, Carolee. I don't know if you're on mute or not.
Yes, sorry, I was on mute. I still don't quite know how to use all this technology. Learning. Hey, it's been a minute since I've seen you.
I know. Hello.
I'm Carolee Hauser. I go by she, her. I am affiliated with myself. I have my own business, Uniquely Me by Carolee. I run events called Music and Art for the Soul, and I'm also now part of a nonprofit on the board, as well as the production committee of figuring stuff out. So part of my figuring that stuff out is grant writing, even for my own art, because I did not go back to my job at Philadelphia Film Society since COVID started.
Okay.
So that's what I'm here for, is to try to figure out the grant writing so that I can be the one doing that stuff.
Right.
For myself and for this nonprofit I'm involved with.
Okay, wonderful. Do you have any experience writing grants?
I have written a couple over the last couple of years. One I did not get. I did get one of the Creative Alliance ones this past year. And I also got one from a group that's involved with Temple as well. So I have gotten $1,000 grant over the last 2 years, one each year, to be able to do some of my art stuff.
Wonderful. Judy, we're just getting started. We were having a little technical difficulties. And we're just going around and giving some introductions just so I can get a better idea of who you are and what you're interested in learning today. Are you around, Judy? All right, we will come back. All right, so the question I just asked you, Carolee, was how familiar you are with grant seeking or grant writing. And I just wanted to get like a baseline just to see how many people have actually done some grants. It sounds like you have some experience. What have been some of your apprehensions about writing grants in the past?
It's just more about not knowing exactly what I'm doing. And because I've worked in the arts field for so long, I do know that they definitely want things to be very specific, and there's ways to do them to be able to actually get those grants versus you just kind of winging it.
Right. Yeah. True.
I've had some, but some of it too is being able to find those grants that are going to fit into what you're trying to do. Because if you're not necessarily like, or you don't consider yourself like major activists, there's a lot of things that aren't open to you.
You said there are a lot of things that are not open to you if you're
At
not.
least from what I've done in the research of me trying to find different grants, like a lot of the organizations I knew about, they always have things worded about community activism. And although I'm like into community activism to an extent, like I'm not over the top into community activism, that my project's not necessarily based on an activism basis versus just doing something that's community oriented versus community activists.
Okay, I understand. Judy, are you back yet? Okay, I wasn't sure. All right, so we'll move along. So in this, we'll talk about I just first wanted to start off by talking about like the myth of this mythical grant writer, that you have to like hire a person and, you know, have someone else do it for you. And it's understandable if you have the funds and you don't want to do it yourself, it's totally reasonable. But everyone can write a grant essentially. And like Carolee said, a lot of times it's just understanding what the formula is, or, you know, understanding like what I'm supposed to do actually, and not necessarily that you don't have a good project or that you can't write this. So I want everybody to think and to understand that no one knows your organization like you do. No one knows the art that you do like you do. And a lot of times, specifically for the types of grants that you'll be writing for, a lot of what you need to do is to articulate, you know, your point of view and your impact. So, you know, the person and the people in the organization or the individual artist, the people who are closest to this work have that knowledge, and they're able to speak to that stuff in a more passionate way sometimes. And that can be, you know, something that can be very helpful in a grant proposal. So that is something to keep in mind, that you don't always have to have someone else to do it. Something that I do suggest, though, is having someone else review it after you've written it. But if you have a small team, you can definitely work on this. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be everyone writing it, but people can contribute to it in different ways. And I'll talk about the different parts of a grant, just to give you a better understanding of what that flow looks like and what are some of the things that can be provided if you feel like you don't have, you know, some of those things. All right, so what is grant funding? I see one of our guests have like duplicated themselves on my screen. What is grant funding? Carolee, since you're the only one here with me, we're going to have a discussion today. So what is your idea of what grant funding is?
I mean, I know enough, thankfully, about specifically the arts that I know what grant funding can do for organizations that are trying to do things. I know that the last year that $1,000 helped me get through that each of these last 2 years for being able to do my art. And thankfully, they weren't grants that were holding me accountable. It was just money that I didn't have to answer to them what I was doing with it because of COVID stuff. So I know that grants can, depending on the amounts, you can be held accountable for what you do with that grant money. Because even working with PFS, they got a huge grant to buy the building that they're in. So, but they're held accountable for that money.
Yes.
So
I mean, and I wouldn't say that you're not held accountable, but I would say that people trust you. And they're taken into consideration, especially during COVID. I know a lot of, like it's difficult for us to manage a lot of funds and things like paperwork, documentation in a regular time. So I know that people have given much leeway in regards to, things like COVID funding. And like you said, there has been specific funding for people, where they just, it's just there to provide, support for them to live or, be certain things. So they're not really asking for much documentation, but simply put, a grant or grant funding is just someone giving you non-refundable payment. So your payment for that may be in a different way. So it may be the reporting, like Carolee alluded to, like you might have to do some stuff on the back end. There may be some deliverables that you have to provide for certain grants. There may be some like documentation or statistics that you have to provide. But basically it is someone having a certain amount of funds and giving that, those funds away to someone else to do, a specific thing. And that could be a lot of different things. It could be a service. It could be, for you to buy equipment or an item. It could be to support your operational supports. So grant funding is there for all of those things. And what do you think the purpose of, people you think they're just giving away this money for, out the kindness of their hearts? Why do you think this exists, kind of?
I mean, I myself know that for a lot of them, like they are into certain things, but they also, people that have a good amount of money also have to do a certain amount of donating and such to be able to sustain their lifestyles and not owe the government all kinds of money. Some of them do it because they really love the arts. For instance, I'm in the arts field, but the stuff that they're doing specifically to give back to the arts because it's something they love and want to experience still in their lives.
Exactly.
I mean, I myself with my grants, like I'm looking on 2 different levels, obviously working with a nonprofit and just doing my own art. So,
right.
But I've seen it in play because of working for a nonprofit like Film Society. I've seen it in play with multiple things for their education program. Like they've gotten different grants for different things, not just the building. They've gotten things for specific programs. And we had someone that did development and grant writing to keep things going.
Right. So these things are typically used to forward their own missions. So and the reason that I'm making a point to say that is because a big part of grant writing or even looking for grants is making sure that the organizations or the grantors that you're looking at have a similar mission to you, or that they are doing similar type of work, because then you would be more likely to receive funds from them, which kind of makes sense. So it's like they have money, they want to do a certain amount of programs, or they have to give back, a certain amount of their funding philanthropically, and they need someone to execute on this, so if they're seeing that Carolee is doing this, work that is, their mission, in a certain community, then we can, give her those funds, and then she can manage that programming for us and do that. Or maybe I see that Judy, has this program, so these funds can be allotted to those things. And that happens on a federal level, it happens on state level, it happens on local level, it happens for individual givers, like Carolee said. So there could just be a person who has some money and they want to, participate in funding the arts. So there are a lot of different ways that, or I guess even like pools that this grant funding could come from. And we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. So I want to get into some language, and as we go along, we're going to talk about some of the language in some of these areas, just so you have like a base understanding of what some of these things are for. Now, I will have to, let's see. I do have some links here that I wanted to be able to show you all for some of these things. But I'll see if I can get to that in a moment. So the first definitions that we're going to look at are notice of funding availability and notice of funding opportunity. Is anyone familiar with what that is already?
Not necessarily in that terminology,
Okay.
but I probably am familiar a little bit.
Okay. So this is a notice of funding availability, typically happens with federal grants, or a notice of funding opportunity. They're the same thing. And they're basically just an alert put out or notice put out to people that whatever federal organization has some funds, or they're looking for a project like this, and then they'll, say what those things are. And then it's asking people to apply for that, and the same thing with an RFP or RFA. Now, these requests for proposals or requests for applications, you'll see from smaller organizations. So you may see like Mural Arts put out a request for a proposal for, like a public art piece or something like that. So they're putting this notice out. They want all the people who could possibly, or have a project or have been thinking about it to apply for this. So it's usually a notice, and it'll tell you all of the things that you need in order to apply. So this is even before you write up a grant, so people are like, hey, we have money, somebody should get this, So I don't know if have any of you ever seen RFPs or?
I have. I've gotten emails and stuff.
Yes. Okay. And
asking me to do those things, but I'm like, I don't even know how to break that down to be even giving you back what you need me to give you. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Yes. And in some instances, if organizations know that you're doing this type of work, sometimes they'll send this stuff directly to you, so it may be on their websites, or they can, they might say, or like Carolee said, she's had seen some of these in the mail, or they can reach out directly. So this is something that, like that you can look forward to when you're looking for grant information, when you're like Googling stuff. Google RFPs, Google RFAs, these types of, things, and then search around and see what could be available to you as well. A letter of inquiry or a letter of intent. Has anyone ever dealt with this document? So a letter of inquiry or letter of intent usually comes with the RFP or the NOFA. So they'll list a letter of inquiry or a letter of intent, and they'll say, you can write us a letter stating what your project is about. Sometimes they'll give you very strict parameters for what they want to have in a letter of intent, but basically it is a mini, I would say mini, proposal in a sense. So it's giving them like kind of like all the bulleted information all together in like a 2-page document. Sometimes it could be a little longer if they ask for more, but it's basically a summary of your project using some of the same things that you would put in a proposal. And they would read over this and then decide on who they would like to apply. So they would receive these letter of inquiries from artists after they've read these RFPs, and then they would have their, program managers or whoever else is working on the grant review this stuff, decide on who they feel should apply, and submit your grant proposal. So this is one way that people get introduced to writing grants as well. So just something else to keep in mind. Seed money. Has anyone ever heard of seed money?
Yes.
Yes, so that's pretty, we know about that across probably all different genres. But seed money is just maybe an organization is giving you like a certain amount of funds to start a project or get a project kicking or started. And that typically is seed money. Now, this next one, I actually worked for a micro granting organization. Does anyone know what a mini grant is? Anyone work with those? Jay Styles or Judy, maybe? Oh, maybe the same person, I think. So a mini grant is typically just a small amount of funds. So it could be like under $1,000, and sometimes it's for very specific things. So it could be so that you can purchase, items or materials to finish a project. Usually it's there to just help you get going or get that momentum going. Subgrants, and I'm not sure how often you might be dealing with these, but subgrants sometimes are, so grants can be issued to a particular organization. And maybe, for example, they, wanted to do a project, but then they have to have, like another organization or another artist facilitate a particular program. They can use part of that grant and then grant that to someone else to complete that project. So it is connected to another organization, and they would be highly like monitoring that and making sure that those things were completed, and that any, things that were associated with the grants on their end as well were being completed, because it would be a part of, what they would be doing. And then the last one that I have is a match. Now, this one is kind of fun. So this grant is typically when an organization will give you a certain amount of money based on the amount of money that you raise. Now, this could be it could be done in several different ways, but there are specific stipulations for each matching grant. And that is something that you should make sure that you have discussion about with the organization that you're receiving a grant from, just to make sure that, you are meeting the requirements, because then if you don't, sometimes you won't get those funds. And matching grants are usually done to show partnership, to show that people are engaged in your organization already. So if you're coming to an organization and you're saying, I need $10,000 to do this program, but I know that I can raise $10,000 from the community as well. That looks good to them, and they know that you have a community buy-in. They know that other people are interested and willing to give of their funds as well. And that also, looks a lot better to have a matching grant, because again, like I said, you have that community buy-in, and funders love to see things like that. Does anyone have any questions about any of these definitions so far?
Yes, this is Judy here. I finally got through. And I was wondering.
Judy, you're echoing a bit. Oh, there.
Okay, I think I'm okay now, or maybe not. But in any case, my organization, Mosaic Society of Philadelphia, applied for a grant with the city. And because we do a lot of outreach programs, we thought sure that we would qualify or be able to get some funding. And as it turned out, we didn't. So I'm wondering, how political are these grants? Is it like you have to know someone who knows someone in order to get the funding?
Well, I wouldn't say that you have to know someone. I don't want to say that you have to know someone, because that's not like really how it should be. There are, I mean, how big is your organization? Your 501c3?
I would say we have about maybe 47 members now. We have the president, the secretary, a treasurer, and there are 2 other people. But yes, we had applied for a grant to put up a mural for the Overbrook Environmental Association. They want to put a mural up on the wall for their community, and it's fairly large. As it turns out, we're going to have to do something on a smaller scale rather than a larger scale. So since we applied through the city, I was just wondering, how political is it when it comes to getting funding from either the city, state, or federal government?
Well, I would say that when you're doing grants, especially on this like city, state, federal levels, there is always going to be some kind of bureaucracy involved. And sometimes those applications are a lot more difficult. And the things that they need, or like the ways in which they want you to show certain things, can be a little more tedious than maybe some more of like a public grant or, community foundation, things like that. So there are grants that are harder to get. So like private foundations, a lot of times they want organizations that have, I'm not sure how long your organization has been around, but sometimes there are different stipulations where they want for organizations to have been around for a while or to have a certain background or, things like that. So, or it could just be, it just wasn't enough money. And that's like the real deal. Like, so, I mean, we know that there's money around, but there's not always enough to give to all of the good projects, and there are lots of good projects out here. There are lots of organizations out here, as well. So just because you didn't get a grant from an organization once on like one time that you apply for it, I would say, if that is an organization, especially that is like connected or in line with your mission, then to keep, applying there, get to know the people who work for the organization as well. Because like I said, when these things come out, like RFPs, sometimes they'll say, I know Judy, was at this thing, or, I've seen her face, she's doing this work. Now, it's not to say that they're going to look at your application any differently, but you might know about things before other people, or you may have access to, they might say, yeah, you can call us and ask a couple of questions or something. Sometimes that's, not an issue for program managers, and they'll talk to people and they'll answer your questions. They want to make sure that you're completing their applications properly. So I would say, I don't want to say like you have to know somebody, but it is good to know people and to be engaged, because then people know that you're not just like, this is not just a money grab either. Like, she cares about our organization. She comes to our events. Maybe she's on our mailing list, these types of things where you're building relationship, so that when these things are available, that you are top of mind. You don't want to be a pest. You don't want to be stalking people, but you want to know who people are. You want to do your research just like you would for like a job interview. It's kind of the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would say don't get discouraged, especially when you're going for like city grants. Like I said, federal grants, like those are definitely a lot harder to get. But they do give you practice for other grants, so now, like after you've completed a grant, you have like all of this information together in one place, and you can like pull parts of it, or read like refine other parts or add other things and submit to other organizations, with more confidence. So please don't get discouraged about not getting a grant. And just try another time,
Okay.
Tezarah?
Thank you.
Yes.
You just mentioned something about kind of having like a template that you can kind of use to fill out more. And that's actually my question, how to create that template so that it's universally adaptable to the various grants. Because I'm a performing artist, I'm a singer, but I also recently started teaching yoga. And so it's wellness opportunities and then performance opportunities, but developing that template is where I'm trying to, similar to what Carol Lee was saying, the community doesn't seem to be enough. It's like there needs to be more of an impact, and that template is where my barrier is. So just wanted to know if you had any more insight on that.
Yeah, and we're actually going to go through. So I have like another slide that has like a list, kind of like the parts of the grant, and you can kind of like, I can go through those and tell you which things would be, you know, good to like keep together, or things that you could probably use again to think about this kind of stuff. And then you can make something that fits best for you. Like there's always going to be like a section that asks for like work samples, you know, like, so you should always have that stuff together. You should always have the ones that like fit with the project that you're going to do, you know, not so, like if you're trying to get a grant for a photography project and you're like showing some sculpture, you know, samples, it's like, we can't see that you would do, you know, like we can't see what you're doing, or, you know, that kind of thing. So you might always have to write like an artist statement or some type of executive summary or bio about the organization. That kind of stuff is good to have, like, you know, because you could just pull it. Like, this is what this organization is about. These are what our goals and objectives are. This is what we do, or, you know, this is what I do as an artist, you know. So similar things like that can be replicated in other applications, but just like with, you know, a cover letter for, you know, for work, you're the same person. So like a lot of information is similar, but based on like the job title and, you know, what you'll have to do, you share a certain part of yourself more, you know, so thinking about that balance. So let's see. All right, so who has the money? Like, where is it coming from? Like, where are we getting it from? So there are different types of funders, and they have certain conditions that they are giving away funds on. Like, I think Carol Lee talked about that, or we talked about that a little bit earlier, that, you know, there are certain conditions that people have, things that they're going to ask for. Me telling you about these types of funders will kind of help you learn a little bit more about like what they'll want kind of as well. So public charity and community foundations. And this is what I told you that most of you will probably be applying for if you're like an individual artist or you're like a small nonprofit. And these are like the Philadelphia Foundation, United Way, other organizations like that. And they are 501c3s, and they make grants for charitable purposes for a specific community and or in a specific, you know, region. Corporate giving programs, these are like programs that would be in like a corporate organization where they would have like some type of fundraiser, or they might say, if you donate to United Way or something, then we'll give you like a day off. Or I know that they said sometimes it's really affiliated with a for-profit organization, but they're trying to do some type of service and give back that is voluntary with the staff. So it's not a separate entity. It's still a part of the corporate organization. Corporate foundations are private foundations whose assets are derived from the contributions of the for-profit business. So like a Wawa or a Comcast, where they'll have like a foundation that's separate, that has its own board, that is there to make sure that the funds are given in the way that, you know, fits in line with their mission and, you know, what they're trying to do. And then family foundations, which probably a lot of you have heard, like Kellogg, Bill and Melinda Gates, William Penn Foundation. These are independent private foundations, and their funds come from members or like from people from the actual family. So a lot of times they have a smaller staff. They don't have as many people. So if you're a bigger organization and you're trying to, apply to an independent private foundation, they may not have as many people to be around to answer all your questions all the time. Or they may just be like a little more personable because it's not a lot of them. So it's like you can get to know the people a little more. So those are some just things to think about. So when you're talking about like private foundations, like I said, they're harder to get. When you talk about public funds, those usually go to like individuals or people who, fall in line with their mission. Corporate, we talked about, they're like interested in, branding, stuff like that. Like, how do they look good? Like, if I give to this organization that's working with, impoverished children, then that's bolstering like my image. And it's also stating that I'm like giving back to the community that needs it, So there are different things that these types of funders will look for in applications and on the back end when you talk about reporting. So what are these funders looking for? So like I said, private foundations, they usually have a set amount of funds that have to be dedicated to philanthropic activities. So they have to spend this money, So if you see an RFP or, notice of funds availability from organizations like this, like they have to spend this money, So, it might not be that you get it this time, but if you build a relationship, you could be able, to get a grant or, just be in a better position when opportunities do arise. And then we talked again about corporations wanting to build brands and partner with projects that can increase their visibility. And then public charities, you want to make an impact, so that is the thing. Like they want to see that there's going to be some type of impact in the community or region that they focus on. And we can talk about different ways or what that can look like. Because I know sometimes it is difficult, especially as an artist, to like understand like how you are impacting communities. So we can talk about that a little more if you have questions. All right. Does anyone have any questions about any of that stuff so far?
No, so far so good.
Right, cool. So let's see. All right, so let's talk about where are people finding grants now? So these are just like a couple of resources for places that you can look. But I've already kind of talked about some places where people are finding grants. So they're either connected to different organizations. Individuals will share grants that are around. You may have a friend, they're like, oh, I know you do, dance, or I know you do wellness. Here's a new grant that's that I saw. Sometimes if you are, I don't know if any of you have like a fiscal sponsorship or are connected to an organization in that way, but sometimes people will send RFPs to them because they know that they, work with a lot of smaller organizations or individuals. So sometimes you can just ask, those people. So if you are affiliated with like Culture Works or like Culture Trust or something like that, or Urban Affairs Coalition, you can definitely inquire, from them about where you can get different grants and support. Of course, there are lots of grant databases. Some of them are free, some of them cost money, but typically you can find right here in Philadelphia, we have the lovely Regional Foundation Center, which is at the Free Library, and they have so many wonderful resources. They do workshops, just like vision-driven artists. So being connected to organizations like this will really help support you in being like on the lookout for grants. I know Vision Driven Artists also provides like a document that shows like every month which grants are coming out, so that you can be prepared for them and start building these profiles for some of these organizations that you're interested in applying for. An interesting fact that I did hear was that 10% of foundations have websites. So only 10% of foundations. So most of the places that are giving out funds, you probably don't know about, you know? So, you know, being in contact with people and connected to, you know, like whatever your discipline is, you know, if you are someone who does, you know, music, you know, being involved in these groups or affiliated or connected to these organizations that do this type of work, you will be, you know, in a better place when these things are available. So again, there are lots of different grant resource websites that you can see. Some of them are on here. You can like jot them down or screenshot the screen if you like, or I can also send it. I think Jasmine said this is recording, so it should be on here. So if you can't find any here, another thing I said is networking. So I know that that's a lot difficult now because of the space and time that we are in, where people are not having events as much. But it is good to do that research just to figure out what's going on and what types of programming or services some of these granting organizations are having. And even like info sessions, a lot of them will have info sessions and kind of walk you through a lot of the stuff that you have questions about. All right, so you know you can do it yourself. You know some of the lingo, right? You know what types of grantors you should be looking for. You know who you should try to match with. So how do you actually get a grant? So I think the most easy thing you have to do is have a project or something that you want to do. Another thing is to understand the grant writing process. And that's what we're about to talk about right now. And a big part of that is the research process. So researching, like I said, I keep, you know, correlating this to like applying for a job, but it really kind of is like this, you know, you're trying to find like the best match for you, you know, for somebody to fund a project that you want to do. So a lot of times people they see a grant come out and then they just like go and attack it, you know. But you also want to be able to do some research on an organization. You can definitely check out which organizations they've funded previously, or even like what types of artists or arts. So you're like, oh, maybe, you know, I didn't know that this organization also gave, you know, out things to individual artists and not just, you know, 501c3 or nonprofit organizations. So you can find a lot of information throughout the research process, like whether or not it will be even good for you to apply. So if you know that this organization primarily funds things that deals with health and wellness, then unless you have an art project that deals with health and wellness, then you might not be like the best fit for them. And it's going to be a waste of time for you to sit and, you know, gather all these materials, you know, complete this application just to not get it. So we want to apply for things that we feel like we would be a good match for. And that's in values, that's in vision, that's in mission, and that's also in budget. You know, like if you're an organization that needs a lot of money, you keep applying for these huge grants from like Kellogg and Mellon, they're like, I've never seen you, you know, manage a budget of $1,000 before, then they're not going to feel comfortable giving you $500,000 or $50,000. So thinking about who they've granted before, what types of projects have they granted before, when do they provide grants, and how, like, what is the process? Do they only invite people to apply to this, you know, for these grants, or is it something that's primarily open to the public? So you definitely want to, research and review, find those things that are similar with your organization or your art, with them, to make sure that you do have that mission alignment. And then if the opportunity is available, then make contact. Sometimes it might be that you're just writing a letter of interest or LOI, just inquiring, like, are there grants that are coming up soon? Like, this is the type of work that I do. Maybe, you can keep me in the loop, or can I get on, some type of web list or something like that. So making that contact, like I said, building that relationship. So then when the time comes for them to give funds, then they feel more comfortable with you. I don't know about y'all, but when people ask me for money and I don't know them, it makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm like, who are you? Like, what have you done? Like, so just thinking about that, in that way will provide a little more support. All right, so let's talk about a couple more terms that you need to know. So the proposal is the actual written application. Okay, so it's what they ask for, and a lot of times they'll tell you what they want you to give them. Don't give them extra. Like, they don't like that. So if they ask you for certain things, if they say we want 5 work samples, don't try to give them 10, because they don't want, like, pay attention to what the proposal says. The Form 9990, that is information that public charities are required to file with the IRS. So if you are a 501c3, that is a form that you would have to file every year with the IRS. General operating support and unrestricted funds. Now, this is like the best kind of grant that you could get, right? Like, general operating support grants are some of the hardest ones to get, and they provide, they allow you to hire staff, consultants, things that keep the operation up, which is a lot of times with what nonprofits or organizations struggle with. They might have, like, all these wonderful ideas for programs, but then they need, the admin support and those types of things. So general operating support grants are really wonderful grants. And then if they're unrestricted, that's even better, because that just means that you can use the funds for what you deem necessary. A lot of grants, as you can see, restricted funds on the next line, that is a grant for a specific purpose or project. So they might say, we're giving out this grant for $50,000 for you to put a down payment on a building or something. And that's what you have to use those funds for. So if they ask you to submit some reports later and you're like, oh, $20,000 of that went to us hiring a part-time staff, or $5,000 of that went to a website, they could ask you for that money back because it's not what they told you could spend it on. So knowing and understanding, like, the types of funds that you're applying for or the types of funds that you are receiving is paramount. Remember those words, restricted or unrestricted. Program officer. So this is the person that reviews grant proposals and processes the applications. So some of us who have written grants, some of us who are in the arts, we know some of these program officers, like, these people, and I'm not saying that they, like, are giving people grants just because they know them, but when something comes up, they're like, hey, Tezarah, this grant is about to happen or something. So these are the people that you're building relationships with. These are the people who are looking over your applications. These are the people who you would be asking questions of at any Q&A sessions, or if you just wanted to call the organization to follow up and ask questions about the grants. Don't waste their time. Know what you're calling to talk to them about, because they do have to review lots and lots of applications. They're talking to lots and lots of people. If you're going to make yourself known, be concise, and get the information that you need, and keep on with it. Don't keep pestering them about things, but they are a good person, and get people to know, and they can even support you with other applications sometimes, you know. So maybe if you have a question about, you know, because this is what they're well versed in, like a grant, and you know them, maybe you can say, you're not applying for this one, but you know, I do have a question about this grant right here. Do you think I would, you know, you think this one will work for me? They might be more amenable to answering some of your questions. And then fiscal sponsorship. So I talked a little bit about this. And a very good thing to know when you're applying for grants is what your business structure is. Like, so knowing what that is, knowing what you have and what you don't have. Are you a 501c3? Are you not? Do you have a fiscal sponsorship, which is basically you're affiliated with an existing nonprofit. They kind of are lending their nonprofit status to you under the expectation that you will be, in a sense, a program under their organization, you know. So they are providing sometimes administrative support. Sometimes they'll have accountants and people like that. Sometimes they'll have board support, you know. Fiscal sponsorships do charge a fee, but it's usually like a small percentage of whatever your revenue is. So that could be something for people to think about. Like if you're discovering that, I think Carol Lee mentioned this a little bit before, but she was saying like it could be harder for, you know, some nonprofits or organizations to get certain, you know, grants, or maybe they're not available to individuals as much. These are fiscal sponsorship is kind of a way that you can get that support without necessarily going through all the rigmarole of becoming a nonprofit organization. And you get a lot of administrative support where if you are new in managing projects in that way, you'll have a lot more support. So that is something that you can look at. Being connected to a fiscal sponsor. Sometimes people who are connected to fiscal sponsors do have, like, there's a more likelihood for you to get granted because they see that you already are connected to a larger 501c3 and that they will be supporting and managing that process as well. So they feel more comfortable because of the partnership that's there. Does anyone have any questions about that stuff? Nope. Cool.
Nope.
All right. And all right, so we ready to get this money? All right, so let's see what we need. So I talked about this a little before. So what is in a grant proposal? So most grant applications tend to ask similar questions. Some of them will ask for more details in some of these areas. Some will be more lenient about some things, but typically this is what will be in an application or a proposal that you are completing for a grant. So we have a title, whatever the title is, and summary. That's basic. So you basically get, or they might call it an executive summary. So you're given an overview of the organization or your work as an artist. Then you're giving, you know, the introduction, who you are. There's a needs statement. Now, a needs statement is very important. So I know that Carol Lee said that it has been hard because she feels like maybe she's not, like, what she's doing is not heavy in the advocacy, but that's what some people are asking for. So needs is something that grantors really want to know, that there is a need for this work. Not that you're just out like doing a project just for you because you like doing art. You know, a lot of times, especially with public charities, they're there to provide resources to people that wouldn't necessarily have them. So if you're talking about like health and wellness, if you're saying that you're a dancer, but what you do has health and wellness connected to it, then you find out like what is important and what is needed for this community in terms of like, you know, your project. So you're like, I've been out in the community and, you know, like as a dancer, but this thing keeps coming up like in my class sessions or something. Maybe we might be better doing a yoga, session that is like geared towards, meditation or something else that will work on mental health, so you can spin things in that way. And then you can use that data, that anecdotal data from the community. You can research like what statistics are, like what people are dealing with and how those things relate. But organizations that are giving you money want to know that the community that you're doing the project or the service for, that they actually need it. So it might not always be like I got to feel like an advocate, but why do people need what you're doing? Why is it necessary for them to do this type of program? Not just because you're like, oh, I love, being out teaching with the kids. What value does it bring to the children? If you can show that, then you'll have a better chance of someone funding a project because they're like, oh, this community needs that. Like, not that just that they want it and we can there now. I'm not saying there are lots of grants, not lots, but there are grants that have projects where it's like it doesn't have to be connected to that stuff or there's no need. But a lot of reason why like nonprofits or these foundations exist in the first place is because people don't have the resources. People can't access them, people can't get to, or children from a certain community can't get in an art program because they don't have the funds for it. So we need an organization that's in the community to provide something for free, but they can't just provide it for free. Like, so let's give them some money, what is the need, and it can't just be about you. So when you're thinking about impact, like think of how your programs or your even if it's a small impact, like even if it just affects like one child, one person, like if you can articulate that impact, then people will feel more like comfortable giving those funds. Goals and objectives. I don't know if you are familiar with SMART goals, but that is something that could be very helpful. And I do have a slide on that a little later, but understanding what the goals and objectives of your program or your project are that you're trying to get funded. Like, how will we know that this was successful? Like, what is the goal? Like, what, think about these things before you sit down to start filling out this application, because these are the things, again, that you'll need maybe to report on in the back end, maybe that you'll need to be paying attention to throughout the life of the grant. Goals and objectives. And then they always want to see a project plan and an approach. They want to know, like, what is your vision for the project? Like, do you feel like it's going to take a couple of months? Are you going to have to hire some people? Like what is the approach to the project? So just giving them like some information about that, like what the actual project is and like what to expect. And then your evaluation plan. So we talked about that. Like, some grants have been more lenient about like reporting, but some want to know statistics. Like if you're applying or you've received a grant from a federal program, they most likely want to see like some documentation, some statistics. They want to know how you're evaluating, what you did actually worked, and they want to see it in data. Some organizations like Small But Mighty Arts, which I used to work for, they don't ask you for like a bunch of reporting afterwards. They just want to know that you started your project or that you were able to buy, whatever you needed to finish something else or to get on your way. So thinking about how you'll evaluate whatever you're working on. And that could be something as simple as just tracking the amount of people that come out to an event. It could be giving them a survey where they can state like how they felt about the program, or like if they felt any difference from, before interacting or engaging with you. And they also want to know a timeline. So they want to know if you'll be able to complete the project in the amount of time that you're saying that you are. And sometimes it could be a little longer, sometimes it could be shorter, but that is something to think about. Like, with the amount of money that I'm asking for, will I be able to complete this project, or will I just be doing a portion of the project, and I'll have to ask for more money down the road? Thinking about like how long it'll take to move the project along will definitely help with developing information for your proposal. And then I put budget and sustainability together. So budget is always a thing. They're always going to ask you, how much does it cost? And this gets weird. Do any of you get frustrated with doing budgeting for proposals? Anybody, or y'all love making proposals for budgets for proposals? Okay, I'll take it as
To an extent,
No,
yes,
no.
because you're always trying to figure out how much money you need for things.
yes, yeah. It's hard. It's
It's
difficult.
hard.
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
also, what if your budget is too big? Like, I don't want to, like, what if they say no and maybe you were shooting for the stars? I don't know. It's hard.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. So these are things to think about, because especially when so in terms of budget, what you can do, I mean, and like sometimes it's nothing that you can do because maybe you've never hired a person to do whatever you need the person to do this time. The easiest approach for that is to always which is why you should give yourself enough time to do your proposal, or complete your grant application. But just searching online, like, give some rough numbers. When people are looking at these budgets, they want to know that you are being reasonable with the funds. Now, don't be like, oh, we need to get this performer that costs $50,000, but then we're only spending like $5,000 on other stuff that's really important. Nobody's going to want to, nobody's going to want to fund that. So being realistic about what your budget is, ask around to people, like, how much does it cost for this, and then add like 5 to 10% for a contingency plan. In terms of knowing how much money you should ask for, I think trying to stay in line with, like, don't just say they got $20,000, I'm going to get it all. Like, be reasonable about it. Can you really manage $20,000? Do you really need $20,000 for this project, or can you do it with 15? Like, because then they'll respect you more for that too. I'm not saying like be scrimping, but if you are more reasonable about what you're asking for, then it doesn't, like, it's kind of like a red flag if you're doing too much, or you're not enough. So it's like, if I'm looking at a budget and you're like, you got all this time for like programming, but you're not hiring no new staff. Like, for me, I'm like, this doesn't even sound like this is going to be a viable program, because they're not going to have anybody to facilitate it. Like, so thinking about your budget in that way, you can think about the stuff that, you've paid for in the past, jot that stuff down. Like, this is what it usually costs for me to market for this type of program, or this is what I usually have to do. Keep that stuff together. So then when it's time for you to write a budget, then you can like research some of those things, put that together, and have a better idea of, what it would take to do your program. Now, you can always apply for another grant. So that's the thing too. You don't have to get all your money from one organization, and you shouldn't, because you need to diversify, your funding sources. So you don't want to have like all your funds coming from one particular grant, because if they decide not to grant you or fund you the next year, you have nothing. So you do need to think about like things like budget, what is reasonable, what is sustainable. And for sustainability as well, like, if you're doing a program and I'm giving you all this money, and then it seems like you won't be able to do it again, then it doesn't make me want to give you the money, because I'm like, how are you going, after I give you this infusion or I give you this huge lump sum, how are you going to continue this on for, 5 more years or 10 more years, So sustainability is also something that you should think about. and it may be, you know, a thing that you have to answer to in a proposal. So lots of things to think about. And then the last one is support materials. And this is something I always tell people as well, like read the application, make sure you're providing the support materials that coincide with the project. You know, there are lots of times where people do stuff and maybe you're doing something that you never did before. You're like, oh, I want to apply for this grant. I do this type of thing as well, but I've never done it. Go and create support materials, you know, like, or samples or work samples in that area so that people will look at it and say, okay, I know this person can do this because I've seen them do it before. You know, people feel more comfortable giving money to people they've given money to before, or they feel like you have a strong management ability. So if you can articulate that you can manage a project, then you're moving in the right direction. Does anyone have any questions about any of these things? Jasmine, I know you, okay. Jasmine, I know you asked a little earlier about, I guess, like a template or things to think about that you could like keep together for next time. Was this helpful at all?
Extremely helpful. Like I could literally just take this and keep this side to side.
Yes.
Just because even what you mentioned about the budget, I can get so caught up in making sure the summary makes sense, that the intro is right, that the need statement, that I completely forget to even ask the person I want to hire what their cost is. And I think this is very adaptable. Like I can copy and paste. Let's say I want to apply for the same project for 4 different grants. Easy way to transfer that information.
Yes. Yeah, so it's a good way to keep, like I said, some of this stuff you could replicate it over and over again. Some of these things you'll have to change it based on whatever the thing, you know, like whatever it is. Maybe it's the budget, you know, maybe your timeline is different. But some of these goals and objectives, they can be similar throughout the project. So you can like play off each other or use some of that information for other projects. And that's also helpful if it's like a lot of stuff coming out around the same time too, you know. So, or like Jasmine said, if these grants and these places have similar missions, or if even what they're asking for are similar, then you can use that stuff and just like tweak it as you need it in the same way that you would a resume or a cover letter. But it's good to have these things around so that you can pull from it. Because like I said, they'll probably always ask you about yourself, you know, so it's like you always got to have like a bio or something like that. And then, you know, you're always going to have like, you know, whatever your support materials are, your work samples, you can keep those all in the same place and then just like she said, just copy and paste things. So that can be definitely helpful. All right. All right, let's look at some grants. Now, I might have to, sorry about this, but let's see if I can share this page with you all, and then you can like read over a couple. Can you all still see my screen? You see this grant right here? Okay.
Yes.
All right, so this right here is a very short grant. So these are just some information from a grant. When I worked with Small But Mighty Arts, and like I said, they were a micro granting organization. So they provided grants up to $1,000. So everyone who was requesting funds would have been requesting for something smaller than $1,000 probably. Some people did apply, you know, for $1,000, but then they'll also, and this is kind of like something to think about as well. So let's say, for instance, you did apply to this SBMA micro grant, and you know that it only gives $1,000, but you need $10,000 to do this project. What do you think it's appropriate to ask for more money? Or no, do you think it's appropriate to show that you're receiving funds from other places?
I would say probably yes, just because if their thousands not going to cover the whole program, they need to know what part of your program that you're using their grant for.
Exactly. So a lot of times, so even how Jasmine said, like, sometimes it's difficult when you're doing the budget because you're like, I know I need more money than this. I don't want to say like that this costs so much, because then what if they're like, oh, well, we can only give her $2,000, so we're not going to do, I don't think people, you definitely shouldn't think of it like that. A lot of times, and I discussed this a little more earlier, but a lot of times organizations want to know that they are not the only one who is funding you, that is like showing them that you're not just like looking for them to help, but that they're like, that you're aware, one, that this project is going to be more than the amount that they can provide, and that you should be soliciting other funds. So when you do have an application, sometimes they'll ask you, like, if you're receiving funds from other people. It's okay to say yes, like, don't lie about it and that kind of thing. If they're asking about it, they just want to know, and you can let them know. And, like your description or in your like line item budget, like, this is the amount that I'm asking from y'all, but we also will be soliciting funds from these people, or we're applying for this grant that we apply for every year, or we got this 3-year funding from this place. They want to see that, again, because that shows community buy-in, and that other people want to fund this project. People want to fund things that other people want to fund. So I'll give you like a couple of minutes to read over this application, and then we can talk about maybe if you have any insights. So while you're reading over it, think about it a little bit. And again, this is just a micro grant, and it's basically just supposed to be a catalyst for artists to get their pieces off the ground, or finish them, or add momentum. So you can read over this and let me know, what insights you or what stood out to you. I'll give you like 5 minutes. I don't know how fast you all read. Are you still
I'm
need
done.
time? You're done? Okay.
And that was very enjoyable to read.
Oh, wow. Enjoyable. Okay. I would like
Happy to
to.
say,
It's
happy to say I'm
interesting.
part of the 11 Days of Love.
Oh, yeah.
As I'm reading it, Mike, I know what this is. But it
Yeah.
was good to see it in writing, in grant
Mhm.
form, versus knowing the project itself, frankly, because I had a little insight.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So what were your thoughts seeing it written, or like, did you see anything different or that you wouldn't have thought about, or? Carolee?
It was just more about verbiage and being concise about the project, but explaining the project thoroughly as well, so that whoever you're writing to, you're not all over the place with it. Because there is so much to any project someone's doing. So it's about trying to find the right words to make it what they're looking for in, like you said, when you were talking about things being concise and to the point, but giving them all the information. So me knowing a little bit about this project itself, because I was involved on other forefronts of it, it made it good to see this, because all of this is daunting to me, writing the grants and knowing what grants to look for and stuff. So to even see this, to know that, not that they necessarily got this grant per se, but to see a grant that was written for something that I was kind of involved in is kind of cool, because it doesn't seem quite as daunting, but it does let me know how to be more concise and to explain what I'm trying to do, or what with my nonprofit, what we're trying to do, because like Jasmine, mine is about music, art, wellness. So it's about combining these three different things to be for the wellness purposes. So to see this was good, because again, it told me how to write something in a concise manner and not kind of be all over the place with it, but expressing what it's trying to do, the purpose behind it, how it started.
Yes, those are some really good observations. Jasmine, you said you had some as well, or did
I really like the brief description, because you basically introduced the project, and the topic is about love, right? But it's through your lens. So I was able to understand that within that first paragraph. Very easy to visually see your plan into fruition, and I could see the audience that you're targeting, like your avatar came out from me reading this. So that's one thing I took away, being very specific, like Carolee was saying, and very detailed. And then the words that you're choosing, they're not like grandiose words, but they're very specific words. And then the second one, I love how you took your past receipts of like where you started and used that to kind of showcase, like, this is why I need, like you mentioned, that this is important to me as an artist because my older work does not fully represent my values at this point in my career. So you got a chance to kind of show your growth too, which I've never thought to do. I've always been trying to like focus on what I'm doing.
Make yourself look perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm doing this today, but it's like I actually started this work years ago, but I didn't know that this work would lead me here. So I appreciate that, because like our receipts matter, no matter how old they may be. And then you're detailing about the project budget, like you're saying what you need the money for. And that can sometimes be overlooked. You can just be like, I need $750, but it's like, but why? And, and how much is that going to cost? And like, who is the person doing the editing, and where's their link? And so basically it's too much information is not too much information, which is good to know.
Right. Yes. So yeah, I definitely think finding the right balance, being concise, but speaking, she spoke to the need in this, like, even if it was like something small, like the fact that they're saying like the work doesn't represent me anymore, like, so as an artist, like that's something that's very important, like to be able to have stuff that represents what you're doing, so that is what she needs the funds for, not just like, like, but like I'm saying, this grant in particular is for artists to do things like this, like for themselves sometimes, but she also speaks to the impact, that it would have on the community. Like you said, the avatars, like who she speaks to, like who these people are, gives you like small descriptions, and it makes you feel more comfortable about engaging in this project, because you, like you said, I can see it, like I can see the people. And then you're like, oh, okay, boom, boom, boom. You just need 3 episodes, $750, $250 each. Oh, sound easy. The numbers add up. You got to do this too. Okay, that's a cool 1,000. It sounds like it could be done within an amount of time that they said it needed to be done. Like these things are like what people are looking for. Does it say anything? Yep. Partnerships. So the screening, outdoor short film screening events such as Scribe Video Center street movies. That's like okay, so I'm not just going to be like getting all this stuff done so I could throw it on my website. We're also going to, like, this is going to be a part of, this partnership with Scribe, where they're going to have content for their street movies, and two people win now.
Mm.
Love Now Media and Scribe. Like, so if I give her $1,000, now two organizations have support that they didn't have before, So when you're thinking about organizations in that way, things like partnerships, like connecting with these other organizations in the community that might be bigger than you, but have the funds to do the stuff that you are trying to do, because then you can partner with them and you can do it and they pay for it, and you still get like that support that you need for your program, and you're providing support for somebody else, So when you're thinking about like, and that's why I tried to say to Judy in the beginning, just because you don't get like, a grant that you apply for, thinking about it in these ways can connect you to other people or organizations that could be doing similar work, where you don't even have to apply for the grant, like they can, and then you all can work together, So these are, it's good to look at stuff like this. Did you all want to look at another one? Do you have another one you like?
Well, this is Judy. I'm seeing this document. I don't feel so overwhelmed about a proposal now, because I always thought that you had to literally, oh God, write 10, maybe 10 pages, or, just a lot of verbiage. But what I like about this is that it's to the point, and the program officer or whoever reads this grant has all the information that is required for them to make a decision.
Yes.
So that's what I like about it, because our organization was literally looking for someone with experience in grant writing, and we're having a difficult time doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And we always said, well, it's political, you need to know somebody. And that's what we were looking for, someone who had access to foundations and corporations, who could go to these people and, who could write the grant for us,
Mm-hmm.
Write it on our behalf. But looking at this, I like it. I think it speaks to the needs of my organization. And I don't necessarily have to write like a 20-page essay just to ask for funding.
Yes, that is definitely true. Now, I will, again, this one right here is for a micro grant. So this was a very small application, but even if I don't know if any of you have experience like with applying for Leeway, but some of these applications are, very small. They don't have so much information. Like, they do want to know the things that we talked about in the other slide. So even in looking at this, like you said, it's only about a page that we've like just compressed some of the information as well, but you still see like all the stuff there. So it's like, if you can do a 1-page, this could be your LOI, your letter of intent for, a particular organization or something as well, because it's like all in one place like this. And it gives people, exactly like you said, what they need. Like, they have a nice summary that is like very concise, where you really understand like why you need these funds, or like what background you have for executing these types of programs. They talk about the need, like why people want to see this stuff happening, what their goals are. And it doesn't have to be, again, like you said, very tedious. But I think if you do spend the time and research and like compiling these things together, it will feel less intense than, you might think. Now, some of these like larger grants, they will be 10 pages long, like some of them will be longer because they want more information, they want more budgets, like they may want budgets from like years before, like they might want to see 990s and other information like that you'll have to pull. But for some of these smaller organizations, it's really not as, scary as it seems. When you say grant writing, just it feels scary, especially if you're not like a writer or that's not something that you like to do. But like I said, if you are doing these programs, if you're executing them, if you're the ones who are facilitating these programs, like you have a certain level of passion, and a certain way that you speak about these that, um, like could pull on people's heartstrings, or like build this story around like why it's so necessary, and you can also like let other people read them too, like while you're working on them, just to see if what they're reading resonates in the same way that you want it to. Sometimes we just need like another eye to look at things, or someone can say, wow, this sounds confusing, or if you're saying you're going to do this here, then this like doesn't make sense down there. Like stuff like that is very helpful to have a second person, because with grant writing it could like I said, you're compiling a lot of information together. Sometimes people are doing them at the last minute, for whatever reason. And, these things are things that you're not thinking about. And then if I get a grant and it says, maybe you just added these numbers up wrong down here, or something is off. And I'm like, something's not right, and then it makes me uncomfortable, because I'm like, if this person doesn't know that this stuff adds up to this, or they're not going to have enough money for that, or that this amount of money doesn't seem like it's going to work out for this project, it's not going to make me feel comfortable. And it could just be like a typo, or something that was just like you articulated it in like, not the best or clearest way. So it's always good to have someone look over these things, and start thinking about what value your organizations or your art or your programs or these things that you're trying to get funded. Start thinking about what value they are actually providing to the audience, and what that audience is, who they are, what they look like. Because the more you're able to articulate that, the more like the more clear it will be for people who are like reading this on the back end. I know in Philly, a lot of us artists know each other. Like I said, you probably know some of the program managers who lead some of these grants. We sometimes we know people in their projects, but we don't know what you're trying to say in a document. So we can't be like, oh, well, they meant such and such and such, or they really they do this program or such and such and such, or try to like explain stuff. It's like, we don't really know these things. So you have to be able to articulate that in a way that makes it clear for lots of people who might be reading this application, who come from different backgrounds, who have different perspectives, could be in a bad mood that day, who knows. So just thinking about like having another person look over it is something that can be very helpful in the long run, and probably give you some insights to, maybe things you need to elaborate more on. All right. Let's see. And this one right here, if you see, has this project budget is $1,000. They have a lot more stuff. So you can see they have performance rental. They know, like they say the amount of nights they're going to have it. So as specific as you can get with things like this. Like Jasmine said, you can't just write like, oh, I'm gonna need $1,000, and then we have to figure out what it's going to be used for. Try to just check and see and make sure, and then like I said, you can also add like a contingency fund. So you can just, whatever number you come up with, add like another 10% or something, so that if you do have some, things that take a little longer or cost a little more, then you do have, a little more leeway, and you're not like, oh, stuck in a bad position. All right, well, get out of this.
Tezarah, I have a question about, is it okay to inquire why you didn't receive a grant or why you didn't receive a proposal?
Yeah, it is actually. And sometimes people will they will tell you, or they'll give you an opportunity to ask. So they might have like a session. I know I've applied somewhere before, and they actually said people who made it to a certain round, they would let you know, like, so you could follow up, and they had like their notes and stuff from the when they did the evaluation, or when they were like, trying to see who should get the grant. Some organizations will send you stuff like Leeway. They'll sometimes send you a letter that has like some of the notes on there about why you didn't get it. And then, like I said, with the program managers and like building relationships with them, sometimes people can tell you, sometimes they don't offer that. It's just like they don't have the bandwidth to like, it's not that they just don't want to like help people. It's just, it's mostly like bandwidth. Like, and like I said, and some of these grantors don't have a lot of staff. So depending on type of organization they are, if they're smaller, they might not have a lot of people that can support like a lot of people calling, asking questions, doing that kind of stuff. But I would say if anyone offers, definitely take them up on that offer and see, you know, what it was that could have been helpful. Sometimes it's like I said, it's something very simple, like maybe they didn't understand a certain thing, maybe it just wasn't enough funds, maybe, you know, you didn't articulate something, or maybe you confused them a little more. So it could be a lot of different reasons why you don't get grants, but definitely if they offer to tell you why, please don't turn that down, you know, because then it definitely will help you either refining that application for another grantor, or just understanding like what did and didn't work in that instance.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So let me go back to this. Oh, okay. So this was something that I just wanted to talk about a little bit as well, and that was the SMART goals. So this can also be something that could be helpful with, you know, like just even thinking about your application and how you would evaluate the programs afterwards. So SMART is an acronym, and it stands for specific. So S is for specific. So be very specific about what the goal is for the program. M is measurable. So is that goal measurable? So can it be measured? So if you're saying that you want to have 5 workshops or something, or you want people to learn more about health and wellness through yoga, how do we measure that? Like, what are some different ways, you know, that we can say that that program was a success? Is it purely based off of attendance or how many people was there? Is it, you know, are we tracking how people feel afterwards, or their likeliness to like get involved in the program again? What are the ways in which we'll be measuring whether or not we actually completed that goal? And then A is achievable. So is the goal achievable? You know, you got to make sure that it's something that can actually be done. So like we talked about sustainability, can we actually do this with whatever the time or resources we're going to have? And then R is realistic. So you want to have realistic expectations. So you don't want to be like, oh, we're going to plan 45 workshops and we only have like a month to do them or something. That's not like realistic at all, you know? So again, things like that are going to cause like red flags. And then T is time bound or timeliness, you know? So when will the goal be accomplished? Being able to say, it's going to take 3 months for me to do this project from start to finish. And this is going to happen in month 1. This is going to happen in month 2. And then maybe we're going to move into phase 3 in the last month. Being able to identify these things up front, or even throughout, like gathering your information for the project or thinking about the project, these things will help you in completing your application, especially when you're thinking about timelines and project approach, goals and objectives. All these things are here. So I would recommend people to, you know, just think about, you know, developing a SMART goal for, you know, a project or a program. So just sit down and then look through each of these letters and then like write out what that would look like for you. And then, think about how to replicate that. You can practice that and, even with your personal life. But it is a helpful way to think about these things early on, like before you actually write the application, so that at the end, when they're like, okay, how are you reporting on this? Then, oh, this was the goal. This is how I was going to measure it. We did achieve it, or maybe we didn't because of this. These things and you can write them in the report. And if there are things that didn't happen, then you can speak to them and not just be like, oh, well, this just didn't happen. It's like you have, a reason why this didn't happen, or maybe you needed more funds, or maybe you didn't have access that you needed to get something done. But thinking about those things, again, will support you throughout the application and in your reporting. All right. So any questions about SMART goals?
Nope.
Anyone use them or think they would be helpful, or you think it's just trash?
I think it would be helpful because
Okay.
Everything is helpful.
Cool.
Why would you think it's trash?
I hated SMART goals when I actually used to have to do SMART goals at like a place that I worked, and it was just like, they used to drive me crazy. But now that, like it's become like kind of second nature, you start to think about these things more intentionally, and it does become very helpful. So I was just joking about it being trash. Don't take that too seriously.
Okay.
It can all be overwhelming.
Yes, definitely. All right. And what types of projects get funded? So just quickly, we talked about a lot of this stuff. Projects that have community buy-in, projects that have built-in partnerships or ways where they can see value in the partnership, or that you're working with other people or artists or organizations. Projects that show sustainability, that it's going to be able to like continue on after we've given this grant in some way. And then projects that again have clear goals and objectives. So these are the types of projects that are getting funded. Now, just because you have those things doesn't mean you're going to get funded. It does mean that you will be more likely to get funded if the funds are available. And some tips for writing your grant. So again, we talked about some of these things: researching the funders, checking them out, figuring out like who they are, who they funded, looking at those patterns of funding, maybe if they've, given out a lot of projects for. Sometimes when you look at the pattern of funding, it might be that so for instance, my leeway project that I wrote for was about, it was for a documentary that was about fat phobia and Black women's experiences with being fat. Now, when I looked at leeways, like I looked at the people, who had gotten projects before. I think one of the things that's helpful, it makes things feel more real to you. It's like, oh wow, they did that kind of project. That seems like something, like what I'm doing doesn't seem like too big and scary. This is like reasonable. But then also I was like, wow, I don't think they've ever funded a project like the one that I wrote for. So that made me feel more confident about writing for it, because it was like I had something that needed to be discussed that nobody had wrote to or had been funded before. So this was something that was different, so that looks interesting to people sometimes as well. If you're providing something that we haven't seen before, it's like, yeah, we've been giving out all these projects about this, but oh, this is something new. Let's fund that maybe. So think about the ways in which the grantor has funded people previously, and that'll give you a lot of information about how to write your grant for them. Another tip is read the entire application. I went through an application one time and I started like typing stuff and I'm doing all this and everything. And I go back to read part of it, and it said that I had to have an LLC. Well, like I couldn't just be like a sole proprietor or something. And that's what I was. And I was like, I sat here for an hour typing up this application and I don't even really qualify, so you don't want to, spend all this time like doing an application or finding documents or prepping for something that you wouldn't really, be the right fit for. So a big thing I like to tell people is to read through the entire application a couple times, jot down some notes or things that you think might be helpful, but make sure that you are in fact doing everything that you're supposed to be doing and that you've read like all the stuff. Take account of things that are not allowed or things that they do not want from you. So if they say, again, like I said, with the work samples, if they're like, we only want one, you just got to pick one. Like you can't send 5 of them because sometimes they'll disqualify you for like sending too many things in that they don't want. They don't have time to read like extra stuff all the time, or some of the things that you submitted wouldn't even get looked at. So it's kind of like a waste of time on both sides. So it's better to just make sure that you're aware of those things. And then the scope of the project. So just understanding what you'll need to have to provide at the end, what, if there are any deliverables, if there are any reports, if you'll have to report for taxes, like any of these things, like find those questions out as early as you can. No jargon and tedious language that people wouldn't understand, because nobody's going to like try to figure out, stuff. So try to speak in concise language, articulate your point. A lot of the things that we already talked about, and storytelling is important. So, you don't have to like write a whole novel or anything, but being able to tell the story of either who you are or your organization or the project will be helpful to people reading these documents. Any questions about that? Nope. All right, and just a note that no 2 applications are the same, no 2 funders are the same, and each of your grant applications should be unique. Okay, so definitely try to make them stand out, and make sure you're not just copy and pasting everything. So I just had like 2 little notes down here that with government grants, winning proposals tend to be more data driven and precise with all of the required documents, and foundation and corporate grants, the ones that win tend to appeal more to people's emotions, so try to find a good balance between the 2 when you are drafting your grants. So if you're writing a foundation grant, like the one that you saw for the 11 Days of Love that I showed, the first grant, she appealed to people's emotions. She talked about a lot of things, but she also gave you those facts and things too that made you feel like, oh, they really need this. We have to support them. So take that stuff into consideration when you are applying for grants, and treat it like a job interview, I would say. And then, so you got your grant. What do you do next? So again, deliverables, what could they look like? It could just be that you had to like complete a certain amount of programs. It could be that, you had to facilitate a project. Again, make sure you know what that stuff is so you can report on it. And in reporting, it could be as simple as like a document. Some of the organizations or grantors, they have documents or surveys that they'll send you. They just ask you for information about the grant. It might ask things like, did you partner with anyone? It may ask if you hired any additional artists outside of yourself, again, partnerships, seeing that you're hiring other people, you know, creating this like consistent ecosystem of art, or, you know, whatever it is that you're trying to do, that you're putting that back out into the community. And then some of them could just ask you to write up something. So it could just be, you know, what happened, you know, so they might want to know like when the project started and ended, you know, what were some of the results or insights. And again, it's always good to write the value that your organization has had or the project had in your reporting, because that is what they want to see. And they may give you more money in the future for stuff like this. And if you're not like sending in your reports and stuff, that could cause problems with the organizations. You could burn bridges. You know, they also will not have the things that they need to report, you know, for the funds that they gave you. So you would be causing problems for someone else by not doing that. So just thinking about and making sure to ask the organization up front what you'll need on the back end, so that you have that. And then also thinking about your taxes and stuff. We always want to pay our taxes, and Vision Driven has lots of workshops about stuff like this to support, but definitely you want to keep all your documents, your receipts, those types of things, so that you have them available for your taxes. And of course, you want to start preparing for your next grant. So again, even though you didn't get it the first time, maybe you'll get it the next time. Maybe it'll be the 5th time. I applied to Leeway maybe 3 or 4 times before I actually got a grant. Now I could have stopped after the first time, but I didn't, you know. So now I can say that I am a Leeway Award recipient, but that was because I was persistent and I didn't say, oh, I didn't get it that one time, I must not have good ideas, you know. Like I said before, please don't think it's your project. Sometimes, most times, it's the amount of money that's available. So funders typically can't fund every single project. They do have to pick a certain number, and that means that good projects will also not be funded. And that's okay. Questions for me before I go? I think we have 5 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions for me about anything that I mentioned, or? All right, wonderful. Well, I just want to thank you all so much for bearing with me and my technical issues earlier. Thank you all for coming back and being so engaged in the conversation. I really appreciate it. And this is it for Intro to Grants. I hope that you all have got some of your questions answered, and that you feel more confident about applying for grants in the future.
And thank you for your time.
No problem.
Definitely, thank you. Is there a way to get your PowerPoint emailed?
Yeah, I think that I can email it to Jasmine, but I think she also said that there's going to be is recorded, right, for the playback?
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, the entire workshop was recorded, and we will email you the playback, and also it'll be available on our YouTube page as well.
Okay, great,
Oh,
thanks, because I'm
cool.
dealing with one hand right now. So as much as I've been taking notes with one hand on my computer, it's still been difficult to try to do that.
Yeah, we got you covered. You can go back as many times as you need. That's what I'm going to be doing. But yes, we got you covered.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Also, Tezarah, Rebecca wanted to know if you offered freelance. She had a question in the chat about that.
Freelance. What exactly?
If you can.
Oh, great.
Yeah, like give some advice under the basis of a real application, something like that.
Oh, I don't do that, but I guess I could if you needed support. Like if you just wanted somebody to read over it. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yes. I'll put my email in the chat in case anybody wants to get in contact with me.
Thank you.
And I will definitely try to help where I can.
Do you just do videos or do you give presentations for organizations like small nonprofits?
About grants, I usually just do this one every year with Vision Driven Artists. But if you'd like me to come and talk to someone at we can definitely arrange that as well.
Okay.
Tezarah, your answer technically is yes, because we're a nonprofit. We're a
Yeah,
small
yeah,
nonprofit.
yeah.
Yeah, she does this. This is her presentation. We reached out to
Okay.
her because we wanted an expert that, one, has been an
Yeah.
active recipient, active in the Philadelphia community, and everyone enjoyed her presentation last year. As she's mentioned, we bring her back each year. So
Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And I put my email in there. So if anyone wants to reach out to me, they definitely can. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I would love to like stay connected with you all. I know me and Carol Lee already know each other, but
Mhm.
yes. Thank you
Yes.
so much. This was wonderful, everyone.
Right,
yes,
thank you.
and thank you, Tezarah. Thank you. We're so grateful to have you,
Oh.
and thank you all for joining us and for dealing with the technical issues in the
Sure.
beginning. Once again, the replay will be emailed to you all within the next 30 minutes. And then I'm going to upload it to YouTube just in case you want to share this with colleagues or refer this to other
Oh,
people. Yeah. So it'll be accessible to everyone. And also just wanted to let everyone know that we are having our next workshop. It's going to be on April the 11th, and we're going to be going over the basics of web design. So if you have been thinking about creating a website or even developing a website, join us on the 11th, and we're going to talk about the basics of how to get started for artists of all levels and backgrounds.
Thank you so much, Jasmine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With you.
okay.
Thank
so
you,
long.
everyone.
Okay, have a good night.
Good
Same
night,
for you.
everyone.
Thank you.